Hey guys, what's going on? Zazubaar here. So, with the recent weekend passing, the big weekend of the release of the brand new Godzilla movie put out by Legendary Pictures, a bunch of really cool stuff has happened following the release of the new Godzilla. Number one, the movie did incredibly well at the box office, which is something that I know a lot of Godzilla fans and pop culture media in general has really been questioning since the movie was even put into production, of whether or not the film would be a success. And there were a lot of articles that came out by people who really had no faith in the project doing well at the box office, because Godzilla has never, not only is Godzilla not the biggest deal here in the United States, but even for people who know who Godzilla is, you know, the character, he's been kind of mocked over the years. It's not a fandom that people take seriously, like something like DC Comics, Marvel, Star Trek even. Godzilla's just not considered in those ranks, and Godzilla fans are mocked for that. And a lot of people saw that, you know, they look at that place in pop culture and go, then that movie is not going to do, you know, big numbers like, say, a superhero movie like The Amazing Spider-Man would. And boy, were those people wrong. And I'll admit, too, I didn't, you know, even as a Godzilla fan who wanted this movie to do well and wanted it to be good and wanted it to be financially successful, so that way, you know, the character could kind of be validated for the wider pop culture ether, and also the potential of getting sequels. I wasn't sure that I really trusted both the marketing department over at Legendary and Warner Brothers and the modern pop culture, you know, universe in general, or even the modern, you know, our modern pop culture society, to go see a new Godzilla movie, a dark, gritty Godzilla movie. And boy, was I wrong. Godzilla has made $200 million in its opening weekend worldwide. Now again, that's a worldwide gross. I don't want people jumping down my throats going, that's an overestimation, it only made this much in the US. I'm going to point out that's worldwide, and that's an estimation. It's not exact numbers. But it's roughly $200 million opening weekend. That's fucking enormous numbers, especially for a Godzilla movie. Especially when the film was only thought to maybe pull in $50 million domestically. But I think it pulled in a little over $100 million domestically, which is still fucking amazing. Again, especially for a Godzilla movie. So that's really, really cool, and I just wanted to open this video talking about that, since the focal point of this video will be a sector of the brand new Godzilla universe and the brand new Godzilla franchise by Legendary Pictures. So I just wanted to open with that, since the weekend just ended, and it's kind of a big deal. And I'm very, very happy for it, because the movie's fucking awesome and it deserves it. And just to say this, I put out my non-spoiler review of the movie over the weekend, and I got really good reactions to it. Thank you to everybody who listened to it and gave your own thoughts and liked it and shared it around. It's got almost, I think it's got almost 700 views, so thank you very much. Let me just say this. I agree for the most part with what I said in that video, and it's not like I would ever consider taking it down because I think I was dead wrong. But there are a couple points I make in that review that I don't agree with anymore, because I saw the movie one more time after I did that review. So when my spoiler review comes up, you can definitely expect me to have some different opinions on things. So look forward to that coming this weekend. And also to World War G, also coming this weekend, where you can also hear me hear the different points I have with my spoiler thoughts as opposed to my non-spoiler thoughts. So I just wanted to say that as well. But what are we going to be talking about today? Well, with the new Godzilla movie out, and with the success of the new Godzilla movie, I thought that it would only be appropriate that I discuss one of the expanded universe titles that Legendary has put out in the past few weeks to be a companion piece to Godzilla 2014. I didn't expect this, and I thought it was really, really fucking sick that they did this. Legendary put out, via their own comic book company, a prequel graphic novel to Godzilla 2014, written by the screenwriter who wrote the movie, Max Borenstein, co-written by his brother, Greg Borenstein. And it's a prequel story that takes place all over, basically all throughout the 1940s and 50s, that builds up to the events of the new Godzilla. Now, it doesn't close where the new movie opens, but it sets up the situation of the new movie, and it sets up the backstory of this new Godzilla continuity, which I thought was a really smart move because of how different it is, but also to kind of get people into the idea of a new Godzilla continuity. And the idea is that this is an expansive universe that we're going to explore that leaves a lot of room open for sequels and expanded universe stuff, which I find awesome, and I'm really happy that Godzilla has that now. It's also cool that we now have multiple Godzilla comics coming out at the same time from different companies. I mean, I know Legendary's not doing a regular Godzilla series, but I just thought it was cool to have my pull list open with 2 different Godzilla books coming out from different companies at the same time, with Godzilla Awakening and Rulers of Earth Volume 2. That was really, really cool. But anyway, so the prequel book that came out to the new movie, it's called Godzilla Awakening, again, put out by Legendary, written by Max Borenstein and Greg Borenstein, with a bunch of different artists doing the art. And I think too many. I'll get to this, I'll get more in detail with this, but I feel like this book... Okay, so Godzilla Awakening, the basic premise is that this is the story. It opens from the moment of the titular awakening of Godzilla, and ends with a major event that opens the new movie. Now let me just say this. I'm going to do my best to not spoil the new movie with this book, but it's kind of impossible not to, especially with some of the criticisms I'm going to bring up. So, if you haven't seen the new movie yet, I would recommend doing that before watching this review. Which is kind of interesting, because then the question is, do I recommend you see the movie before you read the book? That's entirely up to you. It does not spoil the events of the movie at all. I'm only giving a spoiler warning because I might, in order to bring up some of the points I want to bring up. But the book itself does not spoil anything about the movie, for the most part. The only thing that I would say, if you're trying to avoid before you see the movie, is if you don't want to know how Godzilla is characterized in the new continuity, don't read this book before you see the movie, because that's a major spoiler. And actually, I wish I would have read the book before I saw the movie so I would prepare myself for how different it is than what I was expecting. But again, we will get to that in a minute. So again, if you haven't seen the new movie yet, please go ahead and check it out before you listen to this review, because I am going to spoil some things in order to bring up some points about Godzilla Awakening. Anyway, so with that being said, let's delve in. So the book opens in 1945. Well, okay. The story begins in 1945, but the book technically opens in 1980, with one of the main characters from the movie, a man by the name of Ishiro Serizawa, played by Ken Watanabe in the movie. He's younger here since it's... what would it be? 20... no, wait. I'm trying to think now. 34 years before the movie? Yeah, I guess so. Right? Am I wrong? Am I crazy about that? I think it's... I'm pretty sure it would be, 34 years, unless I'm nuts. Yeah, it's 34 years. That was an embarrassing math moment. With Ishiro Serizawa returning home to Tokyo, Japan to see his father, whose first name we don't know, but because I'm a Godzilla fan and because I thought this would have been a cool reference, I am going to call him Daisuke Serizawa, who has called his son home to Japan to reveal some secrets to him because he's dying, or he believes he's dying. Daisuke, again, that's not his name in the book, but I'm going to call him that because otherwise I'm just going to call him Serizawa, and that's going to get confusing. So Daisuke tells his son that his entire life he's been keeping a big secret from his son his entire life. That the job he had after the end of World War II, after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for a company called the Monarch Shipping Company, was not actually a shipping company. It was actually a cover for a United States-Japanese government coalition organization called Monarch, which, of course, is the secret government organization that is one of the main focuses of the new Godzilla movie. Monarch was established because in 1945, when America dropped the 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, A-bombs, not H-bombs, something was awakened. The birth of the atomic age awakened some things on this planet that we would have rather had stayed sleeping. Basically monsters, and mainly 2 in the book. There are 2 monsters in the book. Obviously, Godzilla is one of them. He's awakened by Well, it's kind of up to interpretation, and I have my own interpretation of it, and let me just say this: one of my biggest problems with the book is that it has a very confusing timeline that I don't think makes much sense, and I also don't think matches up with the movie. The movie, and again, I know this is a prequel story, and that the movie should work on its own. And it absolutely does. Again, I saw the movie without having read the book. But, I feel like the movie actually works better on its own without this. While at the same time, I do really enjoy Godzilla Awakening for some of the background it does provide, mainly for Serizawa, because he's a character who does not get much backstory in the movie. We get a couple hints about his backstory, but it's not really established. And of course, the big thing you want to know is how he knows so much about Godzilla and how he got involved with Monarch, and that is what's explained in this book. With his father, who again I'm going to refer to as Daisuke, working for Monarch before his son did, and him being the one who discovered Godzilla, or at least was the first one to make it known that he was a real creature. So what happens is Daisuke and Ishiro barely survive the bombings of the bombing of Hiroshima on May 8th. I'm gonna look this up because I should know this, but I don't. This is why I'm not a history major. August 6th, 1945, 8:15 in the morning. They both survive, but as Daisuke finds his son amidst the rubble, being one of the few survivors of the bombing, he sees something horrifying erupt from the ashes. A creature that he simply cannot describe because it's too terrifying. But it's a living monster brought forth by the bombing. And Ishiro doesn't believe him at first, saying that he was probably hallucinating, or it was probably just his mind playing tricks on him because of the traumatic event that just happened, or it could have been the radiation, or the fire, who knows. There's so many possibilities of what it could have been, that it actually being a monster seems unlikely. And Daisuke agrees with him. But then he says, but if only I hadn't seen it, if I hadn't seen it many times after that, I would agree with you. But anyway, what happens is, at least this is what the book shows, and this is where it depends on your interpretation comes in. What the book shows is, following the bombing, at the same time, Godzilla pops up out of the Pacific in 1945, which obviously is a major departure from any other Godzilla continuity. Now, when I first realized this, I was very, very angry. But then I realized, you know what? I don't mind it. The idea of Godzilla awakening with the bombing of Hiroshima, it makes sense, and it's a cool way to connect those two events. Sure, it's different, but since in this continuity Godzilla isn't a mutant, it makes perfect sense, and I'm totally cool with it. And given what Godzilla is in this continuity, I'm totally okay with the idea of the very first use of an atom bomb is what wakes him up. So that way there's no lull in the consequences of our actions in World War II coming back to bite us. But the thing is, I'm not sure if that's what's going on anymore. Because what happens is this other monster called the Shin Amaura, which is this parasitic, almost starfish-like creature. I mean, it doesn't look like a starfish, but it functions in a similar sense to a starfish. Actually, the way they describe it is, imagine a coral reef if it was more of a sentient creature. So what the Shin Amaura is, and this is explained way later in the book. We have no idea what it is for the first several chapters. What the Shin Amaura does is, it's a parasite that feeds on other creatures, but it mainly feeds on radiation, and when it comes into contact with radiation, or really any other kind of energy, it manifests itself into a larger creature and brings its different single cells to life. Each cell of this creature is its own living thing, but when they come together, they function as one big organism. So the idea is that one cell is alive and can function on its own, but it's much stronger when all the different cells come together into one big Shin Amaura. Now, where does Godzilla come into this? Well, again, I'm not quite sure, but again, aside from the initial interpretation that I prefer of the bombing waking him up himself, because like the Shin Amaura, he too feeds on radiation, and in this continuity, since I haven't talked about this in any other place, and this would kind of be a good place to discuss this, Godzilla is an ancient creature, or a member of an ancient species of prehistoric reptiles that are from a point in history where the Earth was much more radioactive, and this radiation was essential to these creatures' life cycles. And they could metabolize this radiation and use it as an energy source. And it was basically their food and kind of their oxygen. Well, I guess it functions more like oxygen than it does food, because since they say Godzilla is a predator in this universe, then it's clear that he also has to carnivorize in order to get sustenance, not just feed on radiation like it's done in the Heisei series. Cool idea, and again, and I really shouldn't say this talking about Godzilla Awakening, but since it's kind of inevitable that I'll get into the new Godzilla, I like the idea of all the changes they make to Godzilla in this new continuity are they make these changes using aspects of Godzilla lore that has been done in the past, and that I really appreciate, and it shows that these guys are Godzilla fans, and I thought that was very cool. And despite the changes to Godzilla, some of which I really like and some of which I'm not crazy about, I have to appreciate the fact that at least all the changes they make are using aspects of Godzilla's already established lore in this new continuity. So I really appreciate that. That being said, they really don't make it clear whether or not it was the bombing of Hiroshima or the awakening of the Shin Amaura that actually awakens Godzilla, because they get into the particulars of it later on, where they explain what Godzilla is and how he's connected to the Shin Amaura, but again, they don't really make it clear, and the reason why it's not clear, like if Godzilla had woken up either before the Shin Amaura or at the same or after it or at the same time, then it would be completely different. But we see Godzilla wake up almost immediately after we see the Shin Amaura wake up. So because it's shown following it, you can kind of take it either way. Again, I prefer the bombing waking him up, just because that means that, because I just like Godzilla functioning as much on his own as possible. And in this new continuity, they make him very reactionary as it is. But, again, either way, I guess it's fine. It's still Godzilla. Radiation is still necessary for Godzilla to awaken in this new continuity. But anyway, then we jump all over the timeline, all over different years from 1945 to 1954, with Daisuke becoming actually working for a shipping company following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the end of World War II. And one thing that's not really made clear is whether or not Daisuke served in the Japanese army during World War II. I would assume so, only because he knows English, and how he feels about Americans would really kind of cement the idea that he was a soldier in World War II. Again, it doesn't really matter, it's all up to interpretation and its background that I would have liked to get. But because a big deal is made out of the fact that he understands English and that he also hates Americans. Because of what happened with World War II, and because the bombing of Hiroshima killed his wife and almost killed him and his son. Anyway, so Daisuke works for the shipping company, and they're called on a distress signal from an American ship that's been attacked by some kind of creature, and that's what they say on the radio. And Daisuke is, of course, very surly about it because he hates Americans, and he says something along the lines of, we don't like them, but when they come calling, we come running. And he's very snarky about the whole thing and not thrilled to have to go help out Americans. But despite that, his captain says, it's the rule of the sea, Serizawa. We must help our fellow sailors, no matter what nationality they are. And they go to an island off the coast of Japan where the American ship has supposedly run aground. They come across the survivors, and apparently the survivors were tracking some kind of creature that had already taken down a bunch of ships in the South Pacific. And we see the creature. The creature attacks the group, and it's the Shin Amaura. It's this big, black, creepy mass of slime, and it looks similar to the Mutos in the new movie. And my biggest problem with this book is that it's really way too derivative of the movie, in terms of its plotting and how similar it is to how dissimilar it is to the plot of the movie, with the Shin Amaura going around attacking people like the Mutos, feeding off radiation again like the Mutos, and Godzilla having to go around trying to kill it, and also Godzilla, you know, the idea of Godzilla being the one trying to restore balance. Daisuke, after helping save some U.S. sailors and saving his own group from the Shin Amaura, is recruited by, and he handles himself really well. And one of the American sailors who he comes into contact with, Shaw, offers Serizawa a job with the United States government to track down this creature and others like it, because since it's implied that there are more than just the Shin Amaura, which is an idea that I absolutely love. Because again, I love the idea of Godzilla having an expansive universe, and this book sets that up so well. It's not like this is the only prequel you would need to the movie. There's a lot of potential for other stories being told in this continuity, aside from just the story of Godzilla getting hit by the H-bomb in 1954 and the Shin Amaura, and also the backstory of Serizawa. Since let me just say this, if this book does anything supremely well, it really does a good job of giving Serizawa a lot of backstory, which is something I was really, really interested in because, you know, it's Dr. fucking Serizawa. He's one of the most important characters in Godzilla history. And yes, the new movie's version of Dr. Serizawa really isn't anything like the original. In fact, I would go as far to say that the new version of Dr. Serizawa is more of just a different character using the same name as a reference, more than it is a reimagining of that character. But it's kind of early. It's early in the continuity to know if maybe he'll turn into something a little similar to his darker counterpart in the Godzilla continuity. But who knows? And I like the new version of Dr. Serizawa. It's just that he's a different character altogether, and the name just kind of strikes me as a reference to the original Gojira. But again, I'm totally fine with that. He's a really interesting character, and I love the backstory. And he's not an altogether completely different entity. I mean, his backstory is similar, and I mean, it's not him that was an adult during World War II and wouldn't have the same negative feelings, but again, it's not made clear whether or not his father was a war veteran, but that connection to World War II is still there, and a tragedy being connected to World War II is still there, which he does have in common with the original. I mean, the original lost his eye, this version lost his mother in the bombing of Hiroshima, so you can kind of take it either way. But anyway, Daisuke. But again, that's how the book really functions, and I really enjoyed it in that way, and I think that that's why it is so good, because it gives backstory to one of the most interesting characters in the new Godzilla. Even though he's strangely enough not in it that much, he doesn't really have to be, because he's a kid he's a baby through most of it, or not a baby, but he's a kid, and really wouldn't have much to contribute. Really, what's important is that we find out his family's connection to Godzilla. That's really the important thing. And what happens is Daisuke joins up with this new task force, this coalition of Japan and America to stop these new creatures that they call Mutos, which again, that means, what's really interesting about this universe is that Muto is a designation to any giant monster. In fact, Godzilla is called a Muto when he first shows up. So, therefore, the creatures in the new movie, I mean, we call them Mutos, that's what we officially designate them as, but they could have a whole other name that we either, we just don't give them, because Muto is a designation to really any giant creature in this continuity, so whether or not it be powered by atomic radiation, even though all the creatures we've seen so far have fit that description. So Daisuke joins up with this task force, and of course, it's called Monarch. And basically they go around, what they initially do is they go around to different places where the Shinomori has popped up and attacked, trying to learn all they can about it, but more than that, the bigger designation of Monarch is to try and kill these things. This is something I wasn't crazy about, and here's why. Monarch in the movie seems a lot more interested in these creatures scientifically than they do in destroying them, because they strike me as much more of a scientific coalition. I know they've got to come from the military because Monarch is the organization that dropped the bomb on Godzilla in 1954, but I still feel like at least in the movie, it's presented as much more of a scientific idea. Maybe it changed after Godzilla was supposedly killed, But also, in the movie, and again, let me just say this book does not perfectly line up with the movie. There are a lot of questions I have continuity-wise. In the movie, the female character that Serizawa's like student or assistant or whatever, I guess student would be weird because like she's been with him for a long time. But whatever, his female counterpart says that Monarch was established to study, search for, and learn everything we can from specifically Godzilla, which actually isn't really true based on this book, because Monarch is established years before Godzilla is proven to be real, so it doesn't really match up well with the movie. Now here's my theory. Here's my theory on why it doesn't match up well with the movie. There were a bunch of different scripts written for the new movie before what we saw on the big screen got greenlit and got shot. So, the question is Godzilla Awakening written with a different version of the script for the new movie in mind? Because that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's very, very close, but it makes a lot of sense to me with how some of the explanations for things are given. And here's what I mean. Again, Monarch in the movie is said to have been specifically established to study Godzilla, and no other monsters aside from Godzilla are mentioned when referring back to 1954 and any previous years when Godzilla actually woke up. The book is very different about it. They basically explain that there were a bunch of different monsters, and in one scene, they go to Monarch headquarters, and there's an entire museum devoted to all the different monsters that Monarch has caught, and there's a bunch of references to potential Godzilla monsters that are in the mainstream Godzilla universe, like Rodan. There's a reference to Biollante, there's a reference to King Kong. There's a reference to a very, very vague reference to who I think is supposed to be Ebora, because it's a giant shrimp, but who knows, it could just be an original thing, but I took it as a reference to Ebora. The more overt references are to King Kong, Biollante, and Rodan. There's a couple other monsters in there, but they're kind of obscured by the artwork in the panels, so you can't really tell what they're supposed to... Anyway, so over the course of trying to learn about the Shinomori, Daisuke and his partner Shaw find out about the legend of Godzilla. And, or Gojira, as it's said in the book, and of course how it's said in the movie. That's the proper Japanese way to write Godzilla. Gojira. And, they learn about this legend, and of course, one thing I like is that they make it very clear in this continuity that Gojira was an established legend long before Godzilla ever showed up. I've always liked it in Godzilla continuities where they established that Godzilla was a sea legend long before the actual Godzilla that we know showed up. It's one of the very few things that the '98 movie did right, and this movie does that as well. And it's something they don't say in the movie, so I'm glad that it's here. In terms of where the name Godzilla comes from. In the movie, they're just like, oh, there was this giant monster back in the 50s, and we just happened to call it Godzilla. So you should call it that too. Anyway, so what ends up happening is Daisuke hears this legend about Godzilla and tries to prove to Monarch that it exists, and that it's not just some fantasy dreamed up by the Islanders who are scared of this other monster, the Shinomori. Because what they say... Because the way they act about Godzilla is that Godzilla is just so incredibly godlike and above us that we don't see him as a terror as much as the great equalizer. He's coming in to stop the Shinomori, who is, you know, killing us and killing our people. Godzilla is going to set things right that man has screwed up by waking up the Shinomori. And what happens is Daisuke then has to prove to Monarch that Godzilla exists, because, you know, their whole job is to seek out these Mutos and either learn from them or kill them. And they send down the USS Nautilus, which is the world's first nuclear submarine, to look for Godzilla. Now again, this creates continuity problems with the movie, because in the movie they say that the USS Nautilus was not... I think in the movie they say that... And maybe it's different in... I don't know how accurate this is to actual historical events, but in the movie they say it was a Russian sub that went down to the ocean's depths with a nuclear submarine, and then the nuclear submarine is what woke up Godzilla. It's completely different in this movie. In this movie, it's years... I mean, they don't find out that Godzilla has awakened until years after it's actually happened. So, that's a little bit weird. And also, the USS Nautilus goes down to look for Godzilla, and they don't find him, even though he's following their sub. And again, in the movie, they say that that's what woke him up, but in the book, it's shown that he's been awake for longer than that, and he's just avoiding the sub to avoid being found. And Daisuke then becomes obsessed with Godzilla, trying to prove that he's real, but the Monarch is just like, let's focus on the Shin Amaura. So Daisuke continues to try and prove that Godzilla is real, and over the course of learning things from the Islanders about the legend of Godzilla and about what Godzilla has been doing, he starts to construct a theory that turns out to be true of what Godzilla is and what Godzilla is in this continuity. He's nature's balance. When something in nature is out of balance, Godzilla is awakened to set it back into balance. I love this idea for a bunch of different reasons. It's a different take on Godzilla, but it's a different take on Godzilla using aspects of Godzilla's already established mythos to create this new version. Godzilla has always been seen as this this creature created by man, but as a weapon of nature to set things right. As a weapon of nature to put nature back in to set nature right to where it's supposed to be. That's what Godzilla is. Godzilla is this incredibly powerful animal that's the apex predator, the most powerful animal on the planet, set out to make sure everything is in balance. He's the king. I love that because it's using all these different elements of Godzilla's own already established mythos to create that new version. Because what that ends up doing is it's bizarre. And I guess I should probably save this for my spoiler review, but it basically gives a realistic reason for superhero Godzilla. Even though he still destroys stuff, he's more seen in a positive light than in other Godzilla movies like the original, where he's seen as more of a negative force. Anyway, off that point, I just kind of want to focus on how this book sets up the movie rather than actually discussing my thoughts on how the movie handles Godzilla. Anyway, so Daisuke goes around for years trying to prove that Godzilla is a real thing. Nobody believes him. Nobody's seen Godzilla. And even Monarch, who is going off looking for these mutos, doesn't believe that Godzilla exists. They're not opposed to the idea, there's just no evidence. Which is kind of bizarre, but whatever. If the general public doesn't know about Godzilla, I guess it makes sense that Monarch itself would have a hard time finding out about him. Now, here's the thing. There's an idea in the book that is hinted at in the movie that I think is a little strange. Daisuke brings up this artwork that's been around for thousands of years, since before, since the BC times, where apparently there's artwork that suggests that's evidence that Godzilla is a real animal, because it's Godzilla in these ancient paintings from different societies that would have never crossed paths, but it's the same creature in each painting. Cool idea, it really doesn't make any sense. So here's the thing. According to this book, according to the book, Godzilla doesn't wake up until 1945. According to the movie, Godzilla doesn't wake up until 1954. What the fuck? And then according to this theory, Godzilla's been... I get the idea that Godzilla's been around for millions of years and he's very, very old, but I don't understand the idea of Godzilla being around for all this time and interacting with people. Because of course the idea, both in the book and in the movie, is that Godzilla and others like him went down to the ocean's depths to get closer to the Earth's core to absorb the radiation seeping through thermal vents in the ocean. That was the idea, which is an idea that I like, because again, it requires the nuclear bomb to awaken Godzilla to create a world where Godzilla can exist, and it still has the idea of we're paying the consequences for what we did in World War II and what we did with the atomic age. It's that's still present. But with this idea, it's like, well, how did these people see Godzilla if he was down at the ocean's depths? Is the idea that every now and then he would come up? Okay. So it's not explained, and it's bizarre, and I really don't like the idea of Godzilla being around before the atomic age. It just kind of makes all the metaphors bizarre and not really make much sense. So Daisuke So the Shinomori continues to attack people and destroy stuff. Godzilla continues to fight it, and but a problem is brought up, and a really interesting problem. This creature spreads like wildfire and can basically become as big as it wants as long as it has access to radiation, and it gets bigger and it gets stronger. So his question is, if these creatures have been around, if this creature's been around for years, why hasn't it taken over the world yet? It should be so big at this point that it should literally black out the sky. And then Daisuke says, because Godzilla stopped it. Because Godzilla's been around killing it before it's able to get big enough where it can destroy the world. That's where the whole idea of balance comes in, and this is where Daisuke explains what his theory about what Godzilla is. So that's a really neat idea, and I like it, and it's a really cool idea for this version of Godzilla. And the Shinomori is a good enemy for Godzilla. And I guess let's talk about the Shinomori a little bit. I like the Shinomori. It's different from the Mutos in the movie. My problem with it is that while it's a different creature, the plot is almost the exact same. It goes around feeding on radiation, and Godzilla has to kill it because it's setting nature out of balance. Alright, it's different from the Mutos, but it's also the same, and I think that's kind of a problem because this is supposed to be a prequel that expands the universe, yet it seems to be stuck in the mold of the movie itself, and I think that's kind of a problem. And overall, Godzilla Awakening is really, really fun, really, really interesting, and it's a good background piece for Serizawa, but I feel like it's a little bit too derivative of the movie. The plot is simply, and I feel like the plot kind of goes all over the place. There's a lot of really good ideas, but a lot of them are really disconnected. And I feel like this book does not do a good job of having them all come together into one cohesive piece. I think it's possible, and I think that there's definitely room for other expanded universe Godzilla stuff to come out to explain it. But I feel like as this book stands on its own, and as it stands alone as a companion piece to the movie, doesn't quite work. Again, it gets close, it doesn't quite hit the mark. But anyway, to wrap up the plot synopsis, the Shinomori splits into two different entities. One of them is out in the wild, and one of them grew out of Monarch's base and fed on the radioactive material there, and they're now going to come together to form one giant creature. Again, is anybody reminded of the Mutos from the movie? And Godzilla has to stop it, and Serizawa has to find Godzilla and try and get him to do what is in his nature to do and prove to Monarch that he exists, so that way Monarch can get out of the way of Godzilla and let him do what he has to do. Serizawa finds Godzilla, Godzilla fights the Shinomori, and stops one and kills one of the halves, but the other half is still out there, and Godzilla goes after it to try and kill it. But after this, Serizawa brings Godzilla's existence to Monarch's attention, and Monarch sees it as its duty to kill Godzilla because Godzilla is dangerous and has caused damage over these past few years as it's been fighting the Shinomori. Which, again, is fine, and I like that idea. So that's when the whole idea of dropping the H-bomb on Godzilla comes in. And Monarch sets it up, and basically the Bikini Atoll test in 1954, that of course happened in history and happened in the original Godzilla continuity, happens here, but it's different because the bomb is actually used to try and kill Godzilla, but does not do a thing. It completely fails. At least that's what we find out later in the new movie. But at the actual moment in time, it's heavily believed that the bomb killed Godzilla. So that's the plot of Godzilla Awakening, and of course Daisuke brings all this history. The mold of the story is that Daisuke is telling this story to Ishiro in order to prepare him for the possibility of maybe going to work for Monarch. Because Monarch wants Serizawa's knowledge because he has the most active knowledge of Godzilla. So Daisuke passes this knowledge on to his son Ishiro, who is of course in the 2014 movie. Daisuke dies, and as soon as Daisuke dies, Monarch recruits Ishiro, and then basically that prompts us into the movie that we now have, where Ishiro works for Monarch and is studying the situation brought up by Godzilla and trying to make sure that these monsters don't destroy the world, basically. So how does this all rack up? It's very, very interesting. It works well as its own Godzilla continuity. I really, really enjoy the new continuity. The book is a very, very fun, very, very breezy read. I think it's not even a 100-page count. It's a very breezy read. It took me about 20 minutes to read, and I really, really enjoyed it. In terms of how it stacks up to the movie is obviously a lot better, in that the movie is a little bit more streamlined in its plot, because the book goes into more detail on Godzilla's origin and on how his origin connects to the new monster, but it's still a little bit iffy, and I still feel like the book feels like it was based on an early draft of the screenplay, and the book feels like it doesn't quite match up with the movie. I like the way the movie does it better. I really don't like the idea of Godzilla. I mean, I can deal with Godzilla having been woken up since 1945, but I kind of like the idea of the USS Nautilus going down there and waking up Godzilla, and that prompting this new age of monsters and Monarch being established specifically because of the awakening of Godzilla. That's what I like, that version better. That's what the movie goes with, so it seems like that's the concrete situation in this continuity. And while I enjoy this book, I feel like it's a little bit of a mess, and you kind of got to take the events of it with a grain of salt. Because the events are said differently in the movie, and I feel like really the best purpose that this book serves and where it fulfills what it sets out to do beautifully is in giving background for Ishiro Serizawa and on how he knows so much about Godzilla and why he feels the way about Godzilla that he does in the movie. And also where he gets that watch from. They explain what the watch is in the movie, but they go into a lot more detail in the book, and they show you the event as it happens in the book. With the watch being stopped at 8:15 in the morning, on the morning when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, which Ishiro survived, and he brings it with him as a constant reminder of the horrors of nuclear war and on the horrors that it brought with Godzilla and with the Mutos. Overall, Godzilla Awakening is a fun read. It's not necessary. It's not entirely necessary to the events of the movie. If you want to learn more about Ishiro Serizawa and about Monarch, I definitely recommend reading it in that regard. Daisuke Serizawa is a very likable character and almost equally interesting to his son. So if you like that character, you'll like this book a lot. I think, honestly, the book's biggest problem, aside from a nonsensical timeline, is that the art is all over the place. And on some pages it's excellent, and on some pages it's terrible. And terrible to the point where I really don't know what I'm looking at, and not sure how I'm supposed to interpret what I'm seeing on panel in terms of the story. For instance, there's a panel where they do a flashback to prehistoric times when Godzilla's kind ruled the Earth. And there's this panel and it says 250 million years ago, and there's a mountain in the middle of the ocean that looks like an island, and the Shin Amaura is flying overhead, and there appear to be what look like boats all around the island, and all of a sudden the island erupts and Godzilla breaks out of the island, and then Godzilla kills the Shin Amaura and feeds on it. Why are there boats 250 million years ago, and why is Godzilla erupting out of a mountain? It really doesn't make any sense. I have no idea what I'm looking at, and the dialogue in no way explains what the fuck is going on. Again, there are moments where the art's excellent. All the human stuff looks great. The Shin Amaura is a visually interesting creature. The biggest panel where the art really succeeds is, when the artist draws, and let me just say this is done by a bunch of different artists, and boy, does it show. I think there were just too many hands in the cookie jar in terms of the way this book was supposed to look. Overall, it looks very gritty, but it's inconsistent in both how the book draws Godzilla and how the book draws the human characters. There are two pages that are next to each other that look very, very different in how it draws Dr. Serizawa, so that was a little bit strange. But the action in this book is really poorly drawn. It's very hard to see what you're looking at, and I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that there's not a lot of it in the book, since there's not a lot of it in the movie either, so it kind of makes sense that the book falls in line with that. It's a lot more about the story, which I appreciated. But here's the thing. The movie's action scenes, as few of them as there are, they're fucking amazing. The book, it's like, it's one panel of Godzilla doing something that I can't quite tell what it is, and the Shin Amaura is flying overhead. It's bizarre. And I feel like it's kind of a failure on the part of the art. Now, the one place where the art is excellent is that fucking cover by Arthur Adams, who did the art for quite a few issues of Dark Horse's Godzilla series in the 1990s. Holy shit, is it fucking awesome. That cover is fucking amazing. And just beautifully colored, and that Godzilla design looks badass, drawn by Arthur Adams. It's just a badass looking cover. If only Arthur Adams did the interior art, this book would be a whole lot better and a whole lot more worth reading. As it stands, it's fine. It's not exactly what I was hoping for, and I feel like it's a little bit. Again, it's a great expansive. I love the new expansive universe in this new Godzilla continuity, and this is a good step in the. It's a step in the right direction in terms of drawing out this universe and this version of Godzilla and the different government cover-ups and all the atomic stuff. It's really, really good in that way, but it's kind of a mess in terms of how the timeline plays out, and how long exactly Godzilla's been around, and what exactly he's been doing. There's also no suggestion in the movie, or it's also kind of implied in the movie, but not in the book, that Godzilla has caused some damage in and of himself, outside of fighting the other monsters. And maybe that's just interpreted by Monarch, but I don't know. In the movie, it seems like Godzilla had caused some damage on his own, which is why he brought attention to himself by Monarch. But anyway, it's a fun read. It's definitely worth reading if you like the new movie and if you like the new Godzilla continuity, which I do. But overall, not essential, and it's not the perfect way to draw out this universe. So we'll have to wait for the sequel to do that and hopefully do it better. But anyway, I'm going to give Godzilla Awakening a 3.5 out of 5. The art is not amazing. The story is not. It's good, but it doesn't quite make perfect amount of sense. The characters are all great, very likable. I love Dr. Serizawa's father. He's very likable and a great character to follow. And overall, I love the way I love the backstory of Ishiro Serizawa. So I really, really enjoyed that. But overall, it's good, but not great, and I would have liked a little more. Anyway, that's going to do it for my review of Godzilla Awakening. Look out this weekend for my spoiler review of Godzilla 2014 and World War G 6 coming to Adam Noyce's channel, where all of us here at the SOS will discuss the new movie and basically just fangirl over it. Anyway, until next time, I'm Bill Worster, aka Zazubaar. Thank you very much for listening, watching, whatever the fuck it is you do. And have a very happy Memorial Day.